Hi there. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for the help and support and advice in relation to my bandsaw. I got some really excellent tips, so I very much appreciate that. Now in this video, I'm going to have a go at making the front frame for the hit and miss engine, the Farm Boy. And by the looks of the plan, it is quite complex, so let's see how we get on. Okay, so the main body of the Farm Boy is made up of three pieces, or three sections. There's the front frame, the rear frame and the water hopper. And this is a rough sketch of the front frame. So just looking at the side, it's 3 inches long by 3 inches high. And looking at the rear, it's 2 inches wide. So I've got a piece of aluminium which is 3 inch by 3 inch by about 4 inch. So what I need to do first of all is to cut it to just over 2 inches in size. I'll do that on the bandsaw, and then I need to mill it to a decent finish, close to 3 inch by 3 inch by 2 inch. That looks pretty good. Well, it's the first time I've used the bandsaw in anger, and I must say I'm pretty impressed with the result. The only minor criticism I would have is on this edge here. It's slightly concave. I don't know why that might be. But anyway, I'll put it on the mill, and what I need to do is to face all these sides off down to dimension. So to clean the faces up, I've got this 50mm face end mill cutter. I've never used it before. I got it from Banggood a few months ago, and I'm going to swap out these inserts for some non-ferrous cutting inserts which I got from Arc. Now a tip I picked up from Kevin, aka machineNZ. He's got some really good videos on his channel, and to manage to cut the faces so they're all nice and at 90 degrees is to put the rear face against the jaws of the vise and then use a thin rod at the front, tighten that up so that the back face is flush with the jaws. Then you machine this top end here, and then you rotate it 90 degrees and repeat, and you go right round until you've completed the process. I never tried it before, so this will be the first time I've used this. It was the first time I used the bandsaw, so a lot of firsts in this video. So I think I'll be cutting around about 300 RPM, and I'm only going to take 5 thou off initially to see how we get on. $400. Well, that looks like a really good finish. So what I'll do is I'll continue to mill this side down, and then I'll flick it over, mill that face, flick it over again, mill the other face, and flick it round again and mill the other face. Obviously my target dimensions here between these two faces is 2 inches, and between these faces is 3 inches. Well, I just couldn't resist showing you this before flipping it over. I've got a really nice finish on that. I ended up taking a total of 20 thou off just to get it nice and level. So I've just flipped it round so the machined edge is now on these jaws. I've still got this rod in here, and I only want to take a few thou off this side just to get a nice finish. So as small amount as possible. Well, it all seems to be going to plan, so I'll flip it round again, do the next side and then do the next side. I'll do all that off camera and then I'll get back to you. Obviously it's quite important to make sure that the vise is nice and clean when you're flipping it over, because you need the faces spot on. Now, one thing I forgot to mention was that before flipping it round you need to run a file across that edge here, because there'll be a little burr on it. But anyway, I've done all the four sides and then I've flicked it on its edges, on its end, and it's pretty much at 90 degrees, so I'll mill this face now and then switch it round. Obviously I'll run a file across there, switch it round and do the other end, and hopefully it'll be all spot on. Well, I'm very happy with that, just a few thou out on each of the dimensions. So what I need to do now is to mark it up to start machining from the rear. So now I need to bore a hole 1.202 inches in diameter through from the end, the rear, and it's going to go that way, so I need it to go to a depth of at least 2 inches, because it needs to actually be 1.8 inches from the rear, and all this area will be cut out at some point in the future. Okay, so I'll use a series of drills to open it out to a diameter of, let me see, 12 millimeters. So I'll go down 2 inches. Well, I opened it out to 12 millimeters and then I'm using this boring head to open it out even more, but it's really hard going. And I think the problem is, or one of the problems is, I'm drilling to a depth of 2 inches and there's nowhere for the chips to go. And in reality I'd be better off drilling from the other end, because I've got less further to go. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to switch it round and approach it from this bottom end. And the fact that I've got a hole there anyway is good, because then the chips can fall through it. So that's my plan. I've switched it round and I've opened this other end up to 12 millimeters in diameter, and I'm starting to use this boring head now, and I'm opening it out about 1/10 thou at a time, and it all seems to be going pretty well at the moment. I've also set the depth stop on the Z-axis as well, so I can just plough down and I'm not having to look at the DRO all the time. So I'm going down to 1.7 inches, which should be good enough. So I'm doing about 1/10 thou at a time. Probably less actually, maybe 7. And this is the final cut on fine feed. Well, when I originally thought about this, my plan was to machine this section here and the back end of it. But having sort of machined this hole out here, which actually goes into this section here, I'm now thinking it'd be better to machine this here, because this is my reference surface as well. But ironically, what I'm going to end up doing now is cutting out most of the hole I've just made. But anyway, you live and learn. So what my plan is, I'm going to put this on the bandsaw and cut this section out, but I'll do that off camera. So I've cut this section out using the bandsaw, I've centred the rotary table, then I've put the piece on the rotary table and I've centred it on this point here, which is 2.5 inches from this edge here and 0.985 inches from this edge here. So the idea now will be to cut a radius of 0.7 inches, which will just turn around here, hopefully. So I'm going to use an 8mm cutter. So 8mm divided by 2 is 4mm. So if you take 4mm off 0.7 of an inch, you get to 0.542. So if I move the y-axis by that amount, I should coincide with this line, and when I move the rotary table round I should coincide with this line. So let's see if we do. Pretty good. Although you can't see it there, that looks good too. So I've made sure it's clamped down. So I'll start making cuts at 10th increments. Well, that looks good, so I'll carry on cutting. I'll do it off camera. Well, it all seems to be going to plan. I've just put this longer cutter on, and I'll continue cutting until I get down to about 1 inch in depth. Well, that looks pretty good. So what I'll do now is I'll just switch it round. I've moved the table back, so that's on centre. So I'll centre the piece on the mark I made, which is identical to the position of the other mark, and then I'll machine the rest of it. But I'll do all that off camera. Well, it didn't turn out too bad. It's not perfect because there was a join mark down the middle, so I've had to use some wet and dry. Maybe I should have used a fly cutter or something like that, but I've not got a fly cutter and I don't know much about them. But it's now got me thinking about how I create the arc here. Maybe I need to get a fly cutter. So I need to do a bit of investigation, and I'll get back to you. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is to have a go at machining this radius on the outside edge here, and I'm going to try and do that on the rotary table. Okay, so the way I'm hoping to achieve this is I've centred the rotary table by putting this MT2 to ER25 collet holder in the centre, and I've used this coaxial indicator to get the centre. So that's pretty close. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hold this in a collet, and I've machined this end here, put a thread on it, and that will actually go through the body of the front frame, and I can bolt it so it'll automatically get centred, and then I can move the table forward an inch and machine round that radius. Okay, so this could take some time. I'm going to cut in 10th hour increments. I'm using my World of Ward controller as well. So I won't increase the cut going backwards because that'll be climb milling. Well, I think that's turned out pretty well. Initially I only cut about ½ an inch down, and then I realised after I'd taken it off the mill that this radius here is going to expose some of this, so I've had to take another ½ inch off. But anyway, looking good so far. So now to have a go at cutting this arc around here, and it's taken me about an hour to set this up. The table's centred, and the part needs to be positioned at a centre point which isn't actually on the part. So I've actually I've worked out what the offset should be and marked it on this piece of scrap down here. So that's actually resulted in the centre being pretty much 1.562 of an inch from this front face here, and 3.125 of an inch from the bottom here. So what I need to do is to cut a radius of 1.125 of an inch. Now I'll put a 10mm cutter in, so that actually means that I need to offset the y-axis by 1.125 of an inch minus 4mm, whatever that might be. Well, it all seems to be going okay at the moment, so I'll carry on off camera, and the idea is I'll put a longer cutter in and try and cut right through. That's the plan anyway. So now I'm just going to plunge cut round this inside radius. Well, I think that's as far as I can go with this straight cutter, and I need to start removing a lot of this now so I can put it in the vise and start that process. Ideally it needs finishing off on the inside with an 8mm ball nose cutter. Now I can get one in here, but it's not long enough to go down the insides when I've cut these bits off, so I think I'm going to skip that particular process. Well, it's going to take forever to mill all this out. I might actually try just drilling some of it out. But anyway, once I've completed it, I'll get back to you. Well, it took me hours and hours to bore all this out. I used a mixture of end mills and drill bits, but I got there in the end. So the last milling operation on this is to cut out a section here. I think it's what, 0.1275 deep and halfway along the edge, and this is where the front frame will join the rear frame. Well, that was an interesting exercise, and it's definitely the first time I've tried making anything out of a lump of metal. I do find it sort of quite difficult at times envisaging what the 3D shape is going to be when I'm looking at two-dimensional drawings. So it's really interesting seeing it take shape. And this indexable face end mill, I think that's what you call them, first time I used that, and I was really impressed with the way that turned out. But anyway, that's the end result. There's a little bit of extra work to be done, drilling and tapping, but I'm going to wait until I get to more of an assembly stage before I do that. But I hope you like the results so far, and I hope to see you later.